Well, I was a fanatic. There's no doubt a fanatic. My goal was to get carried out of the wrestling room because of exhaustion, and it never happened. The thing it did for me every day about 6 o'clock is that when I got out, I looked back in and there was nobody else there. Bottom line was I didn't reach my goal. So guess what happened? I went back in the room again. But I got some quality time because of just some kind of a fanatic goal.
Today's guest is Mark Bam Bam Pustelnik. Bam was a former high school state champion, wrestled at UNI, and went on to be a U.S. Open champion in Greco-Roman, and represented the United States team at the Pan American Games. He's also one of the most respected coaching figures in Iowa and Illinois, and now serves as athletic director at his alma mater. So this is a fun episode because I grew up near Bam. He was a legendary figure and someone I looked up to my whole life, so it was really cool to sit down with him, kind of pull the curtains back and get a sense for how he thinks about competition, how he thinks about pressure and doing the right things, and ultimately how the sport impacted his life. So I really hope you all enjoy this one. For past episodes, please visit WrestlingChangeMyLife.org. One of the most downloaded episodes we have thus far is Dan Knight. Nate Gallick's right up there as well, so check those out. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe. Give us a rating on iTunes. It would mean the world to us. So sit back and enjoy this episode with Mark Bam Pustelnik.
We're live on the podcast with Bam Pustelnik. Bam, how you doing today?
Good, Ryan. Thanks.
Anytime. We're happy to have you on. Obviously, we know each other from years of wrestling in the Quad Cities, and I'm just excited to have you on. So I wanted to start with just kind of how you got into sport. Obviously, the theme of this podcast is wrestling changed my life, and reason being is that anyone who wrestled can agree that it had some impact on their life, but you had an extraordinary amount of success in your early days. So maybe just walk us through how did you get involved with wrestling, and what was it like for you early on?
Okay, yeah, I started at the end of my third grade year. One of my dad's best friends was Bert Hanlon, who was the high school wrestling coach at the time. And he got me involved in it. I started wrestling with the East Moline Wrestling Club with Bert Hanlon and Larry Duffy, and it just kind of took off from there. It wasn't easy right off the bat. I lost, right off the first few matches, obviously, but I just got better and better as the years went on.
And you ultimately won a number of state titles in the middle school ranks, and you were coming in. Yeah, I would imagine as really a highly touted freshman, but because you were undersized, you had to sit out for your first 2 years. What was that experience like? Was it a tough thing to go through, or did you kind of expect it coming in and knowing that you were going to be undersized?
A little of both. Like you said, I had some success in the elementary schools. I won the states in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and then came in freshman, and we had a good kid, Chris Tiemeyer, who ended up getting 4th in the state that year. So I knew I wasn't going to beat him. I was only weighing about 70 pounds at the time. So I was very, very small. And then my sophomore year, I struggled a little bit, and it was tough, but I just kept working, kept training, knowing my time would come. And then the following year as a junior was the year I won state then.
Yeah, you went 42-0 and actually beat a guy in the finals who was the junior national champ the summer prior, which would be the equivalent of winning Fargo now. So going into that match, obviously he had a lot of pressure on him to win. Do you remember what you were thinking going into those big matches and how you stayed calm and were able to perform under the pressure, so to speak?
Well, back then I listened to the Rocky soundtrack a lot. That's what kept me relaxed. I had a really good coaching staff. My assistant, Todd Rosenthal, was always there for me, and we kept it pretty loose, him and I. And we trained together year round, so he kind of knew, how to get me in the right mindset. And I actually went into that match not too worried about anything.
Wow. So Rosenthal was at UT back in those days. I didn't know that.
Yes, he was my coach my freshman, sophomore, and junior year. And then my senior year is when he went to Moline. I still blame him as to why I got second that year.
That's funny. Well, he was for folks who don't know, a legendary coach, a fellow Hall of Famer in his own right, led Moline to a team state title. But okay, so he was your coach. Wow. Okay, so going into that state title year or the state finals your junior year, you were fairly loose just because again you probably weren't the guy seated number one to win that, even though you had won a number of events yourself. Okay.
Right.
And
yeah,
then
I wasn't expected to.
Okay. And then kind of just overall, when you think about obviously the physical part of wrestling, the technique, the drilling, the live wrestling, you did that as much as anyone. But how did you think about the mental side of things, and even maybe in your coaching days? How were you able to get folks to just relax and maybe rely on their training? Did you have anything in particular that you used on the mental side of things?
Nothing in particular. Probably the toughest aspect of any wrestler or coach is getting the, getting the mindset, in the right frame of mind. You can't succeed if you doubt yourself. And I struggled with that a little bit in college. Just being mentally tough and not worrying about it. I look at Penn State right now and the way they wrestle. Their kids wrestle so relaxed. It's not the end of the world if they lose. Kyle Snyder, wrestling doesn't define him. That awesome, interview they had with him after getting second in the world. Those are the people that have to have that mindset. They have to be able to go in realizing it's just a match, and it's not going to define who you are. And trying to get the kids to believe that it's just practice, for the big event. I try to push that a lot. Just go out there, relax, have fun, let it loose, because if you're scared, you're not going to wrestle to your full ability. So why even act scared? Why even be scared? You're going to perform worse. So just getting the kids to try to believe that was a big goal of mine and a huge obstacle as well.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it with the Penn State guys. Cale Sanderson, unfortunately, is a little bit like Bill Belichick, and you get very little out of him. But you'd almost just love to understand what's being said to those guys to get them to be so free, or if it's something that's almost just implied when you go there that, hey, you're wrestling the best guys here, so whatever else happens out there, I mean, more often than not, you're having better competition in the room. I don't know what it is. What are your thoughts on it? It's such a remarkable thing that he's doing out there.
I think it's a family atmosphere. I think he recruits a certain type of kid, and that's the kid he wants in his program. I think they train hard, but at the same time, wrestling is not their life. I think they're also very academically driven as well, because Kel was as well. He did things the right way, so he expects his kids to do things the right way. And I think over time, those kids become a little Kel. They become him so much, and they just they wrestled relaxed. They know he's not going to yell at them. They know he doesn't think wrestling's the end of the world. So I think they're not afraid to wrestle for him. Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head with the type of guy he brings in. It seems like they do everything right. They don't party a lot. They're all very religious, which is not something you see at all programs. And so I think it is, he finds the right people, and obviously they love to wrestle, and that just allows them to compete kind of just as free and open as you possibly could. It's really refreshing to watch, as compared to some of those programs at Iowa where it's more of like a grind match and it's not as much offense, but then at Penn State, they're just scoring at will almost. It's crazy to watch.
Right. No, I agree totally. They just get after it. They leave everything on the mat, and win or lose, you watched the match last year with, Valencia beating the Penn State kid, Hall, and Hall was there the next match cheering on Bo Nichols, right after you lost the NCAA title. That's what they've produced out there. That's who they are. It's pretty special to watch.
Absolutely. It is, and it's exciting. I think it's good for wrestling too, because it makes it more fun for the kids, right? Because I'm sure when Gable was on his run, all the kids coaches thought that you had to coach like that, which obviously that's probably not the best way to do it. Whereas now that Cale's so dominant, all the kids club coaches are probably trying to emulate his style, which is actually have fun, stay loose and really enjoy the process more so than a grind type mentality.
Right. Yeah. Penn State's success right now and Iowa's success in the 70s and 80s were exact opposites. Not saying one was better, but they're the exact opposite mentality-wise, you know, and approaches to the game. And then you got people like Tom Ryan, who's a phenomenal guy, great coach. He's kind of in between, you know, with his program.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a little bit of Iowa and he's got a little bit of Penn State in him. You know, so it's interesting, you know, that they all three can have success.
And then you got John Smith out there too, which he was doing it, you know, after Gable, but before Tom Ryan and Cale. Where would you put him in that mix?
Oh, he's one of the greatest coaches. I mean, I think he was a better athlete personally. He's had some great success. There's no doubt about that. But he was one of a kind as a wrestler. You know, he was one of the top 3 or 4 of all times from the United States. But he started early on. You know, he coached when I wrestled, and you know, he tried to bring his mentality and his style to the kids. And it took him a while watching him to realize that, you know, he had to let the kids, you know, wrestle their own style, you know. And once he did that, you know, that's when they started winning, you know, titles or bringing home trophies all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hear Daniel Cormier talk about that because he wrestled for Smith in '99. And by that point, you know, I think John Smith became the coach in '93 because he won his last gold in '92. So maybe even he was coaching at Okie State in '92. But, you know, for those early years, it was, and he admits that it was a big change for him to go from, you know, being a competitor where it's all about you to being a coach where you have to be empathetic to others and understand, you know, everyone's motivated a little bit differently. But, you know, Cormier says when he got there in '99, there was a change. And then by the mid-2000s, obviously, they'd won it several times. And so it's just interesting to hear you talk about that because that obviously played out. But where do you think Coach Smith falls with the, you know, between Cale, Gable, and Tom Ryan? Where do you see him on that spectrum? I know it's kind of tough to say.
Boy, I think he's right there with Tom Ryan. You know, I think he brings a little of both. They don't have the push like, you know, the Iowa style. It's more of a sit back and dance and, you know, let them come to you, and then I'm going to attack. So, you know, now you brought that up, all 4 of those programs, probably the top 4 programs in the country, you know, over the last 20 years, and they're all different, which is very unique, you know, as a kid that's being recruited by them. Yeah,
they're very different. And I'd love to go back to your career a little bit. So you went to UNI in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was actually quite a bit of change going on in college wrestling. Arizona State had just won their first title, which was the first time someone outside of Iowa or Oklahoma had won. Iowa State got a win in the next year, but then Iowa got back on their horse in the 90s and really ran away with it. But what was college wrestling like back then? What were the workouts like? What was the mentality like? Kind of give us a glimpse of what it was like in the college days when you were back in it.
Yeah, it was tough. We had a good team. I went there because of some of the kids that I got a chance to wrestle with. You know, Mark Schwab, Bobby Malatesta, Dwayne Harris. I mean, those guys were all, Dwayne Martin, they were all my weight, right around my weight. So I had great workout partners. So I took a beating the first year or so, which I wasn't used to, but folk style really wasn't my niche. Greco was more than folk style, but I still had some success. I should have had more. Getting back to that mindset, I didn't have that mindset that I should have had. Knowing that now, but it was a good career for me there. I learned a lot. I became, you know, who I am from, you know, the training and the constant battling and just the tears, the joys, the sorrows, you know, all of that stuff, you know, getting knocked back down and having to get back up and just, that's life, you know, life's going to keep knocking you down and you got to get back up. And I definitely learned that in those, you know, those years at Northern Iowa.
I mean, and that's why I'm hosting the podcast, and why obviously all of us are so passionate about getting others involved in the sport is that it's many ways a microcosm for life, right? Because the failures you experience in sports, while they seem like the end of the world at the time, in the grand scheme of things, they're very, many times meaningless. Whereas when you experience a real failure or a real difficulty in real life, you know, hopefully sports gives you something to fall back on so you know how to navigate that. But, you know,
absolutely. I kind of try to tell my kids this, you know, my own kids, you know, it's like, it doesn't guarantee you anything, hard work. it just puts you in a better position, for success. And you can study for an ACT or an SAT 100 more hours than the person to your right, and that doesn't guarantee you're going to score better on that test than them. That person might be smarter and they don't need to study, but what it does is it puts you in a position that you are better off, and you're more prepared to have success, and that's all you can do in life.
Exactly. And it gets back to just controlling what you can control and living by that internal scoreboard versus the external scoreboard. And it hits directly on what you said earlier about Kyle Snyder, which if the listeners haven't watched that video, I'll post it in the show notes. But, the guy just comes off the match loses in an extremely disappointing fashion to the outsider, right? The outsider says, hey, you got pinned by a guy you beat last year. You would think that maybe you'd be pissed or you'd be throwing something. But, the guy is like a model for how kids should act after a loss. He was completely upbeat, and to your point earlier, said, hey, a wrestling match doesn't define my life. It was really refreshing to see that after a big match like that.
No, it was. And, and like I said, that's why he is, coming from Ohio State, under Ryan, that's why he is the way he is. He's down to earth. He's making a career out of wrestling, which very few people can do. And, that was a financial loss too, a huge financial loss, and
huge.
He still it doesn't bother him. Sure, he wanted to win. Sure, he'll probably go back to the hotel room and cry a little bit. He put hundreds of thousands of, sweat and tears into that match, but he held his composure, and he knew people were watching him. He knew little kids were watching him, and, and he does it the way he's supposed to do it. Very classy.
Very much so. And do you think wrestling is in a good a place now as it's ever been, or, you've been around a lot longer than I have, but what's your opinion on that, Bam?
I think our good wrestlers are better than they've ever been. I look at it with travel sports too. I'm not a huge travel sports person. I think it's hurting your average to below average kid. It's only helping your excelled kids. But, and I look at that way with wrestling too. Our wrestlers right now are just phenomenal. Look at, you got, Burroughs, Dakin, Taylor, and Jaden Cox right there, 4 in a row. And 2 of them aren't going to make the Olympic team. At least 2. I'm just, so,
yeah.
For those guys just to be, we're 1, 2, 3 deep, and don't throw out Derringer. Don't throw out, Zahid Valencia. Incredible.
Aymar,
how deep those guys are. Yet they still, so I think it's probably better now than it's ever been as far as our elite wrestlers.
It's interesting what you said though about the clubs and just obviously the single-minded focus of athletes now. And I think probably what you're getting at is that even 20 years ago, kids could do multiple sports throughout middle school, throughout high school, and still have a relatively high degree of success in their chosen sport. But now you're seeing, even as young as 6th grade sometimes, kids are being forced into picking one sport, either by their parents or by themselves, and then doing that to the exclusion of all else.
Right.
So yeah, as a former coach, and I know go ahead.
And it's hurting our lower level sports. You got a kid in 4th or 5th grade that's playing travel baseball, and the coaches are like, well, we don't make it year round. Well, yeah, you do. When you have open gyms in the winter and, these kids feel they got to be there, it's busy, and the parents are constantly driving these kids around. So then when all of a sudden a kid says, hey, I want to try wrestling, or I want to try golf, or I want to, try gymnastics, the parents' first comment is probably when are you going to fit it in between, travel baseball, travel basketball, all these travel soccer? When do you plan on wrestling? And I think these travel sports definitely hurts what I would consider the lower level sports.
Definitely. It's a fine balance, right? Because you look at some of these really elite clubs, or I call them more like an academy, where they're not tied to a school. They're a standalone facility, like Overtime School of Wrestling.
Right.
Like, what do you think about that? When as a parent and a former coach, like, when do you think is the right time to let a kid wrestle like that all year round? This could be applicable to any sport, but where do you fall on that spectrum?
I think you can balance it. I really do. I mean, I wrestled year round for the most part, but I still played soccer. I still golfed. Those were kind of my breaks, to give my body a chance to heal. When you wrestle year round or play baseball year round or basketball year round, all you're doing is working that same muscle over and over and over and over. And there's no time for rest and repair. So that was the beauty, and what they say, is the beauty of multi-sports, or at least two, is, you're not just overkilling those same muscles. You're using different ones. So it's tough to know, because, if you got a kid and he's just a talent, a Kyle Dake, a Taylor, and you see that in 7th grade. Gymnastics have been doing it for years. Those kids specialize when they're 9 years old, 10 years old, and move away from mom and dad to train full time. So it's kind of tough when you see a kid that's got that talent, he's got that once in a lifetime type ability. But I think in general, your normal average athlete, me, you, kids like that, yep. I think you can do both. And I think it's important to do both.
And I also think there's a fine line between someone wanting to do it versus someone being told to do it. I've listened to a lot of interviews with David Taylor when he was like the guy going up to his mom and dad, like begging them to take him wrestling all the time. Whereas, when I was coaching, I'm sure when you were coaching, many times it's the opposite. And it really is a sad thing, because I think of all the sports, wrestling can be the most grueling on a kid whose parents are forcing them to do it. So I think that's something to distinguish early on, is who's the driving force behind it,
Right. No, absolutely. My dad did that same thing with me. He would test me a couple times and he would lie to me. He would be like, "Hey, I don't really want to go up to Chicago this weekend for this tournament. Do you?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, Dad, I got to go up there. So-and-so's going to be up there. I want to wrestle him, And then he'd be like, "Okay." He knew all along he wanted to take me up there, but, he wanted to make sure that I was doing it for the right reasons, that I wasn't doing it for him.
So you loved it and were just addicted to it at an early age like that.
Absolutely. Yep. Yes, I was.
What do you think it was that you loved about the sport so much?
I think it was because I controlled my own destiny. I wasn't on a team. I wasn't depending. My success wasn't depending on anybody else. And I liked that grind. I liked the fighting part of it, and being able to train at my own level, my own hours, and I didn't need I had workout partners, don't get me wrong, but you didn't have to have a workout partner. You could shadow wrestle on your own. You could, you could go out for a jog, you could lift weights, you could do all the little things that you had to do to be successful in the sport. And I wasn't depending on anybody else. And I think that's what really steered me to enjoying the sport more than anything else.
Yeah, it's a liberating feeling to be able to do that and work out whenever you need to. I mean, do you remember times in high school where you were getting up, super early to work out and staying late? I mean, was that you just a complete workaholic back in the day?
Yeah, I was, and I like I said, I enjoyed that aspect of it. I mean, and I carried it through into my coaching too. Sometimes I was a little too hard on the kids. There's no doubt about that, but and they'll tell you that. But I got better as a coach, just like a wrestler. It took me a while to figure out how to coach, like Smith and all those guys, and I got better as I went on, no doubt about it. But I think just in general, just I even forgot where my train of thought there. But I think in general, just from the coaching aspect and the wrestling aspect, just loving the sport, just the fight, just loved it.
Well, and before we let you go here, your coach, I just want to shift into just 5 quick rapid fire questions, if that's okay, and then we'll let you get back to your day. Cool.
Sure. No problem.
First question is, what was the toughest match that you can remember? Middle school, high school, international, whatever it was.
The toughest match was probably Pan American Games, the finals. I got beat by a Cuban. Probably the worst 4-0 beating I ever took in my life. It felt like it was 40-0. But the Brands brothers, lots of matches with them, tough competitors. One of the best wrestlers I've ever wrestled in my life, hands down, is Mark Schwab. Career was cut short because of a knee injury, but so those 3 are probably the tops.
Man, I didn't realize that Mark Schwab, that's Doug Schwab's brother, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And he was at UNI when you were there. Was he a coach there?
He was there at UNI wrestling.
Okay. So second question is, what was your favorite post weigh-in meal?
Post weigh-in meal, probably lasagna.
Taking you back. Yeah.
Probably lasagna.
Everyone says pasta.
Yep.
Okay. Fair enough. Third question is, who's one of the more influential people you looked up to throughout your sport?
Todd Rosenthal was definitely one of them. Bert Hanlon, Larry Duffy, Mark Johnson, all Quad City people for the most part.
Yeah, Mark Johnson, legend. Hope to have him on at some point. Same with Todd Rosenthal. I don't know those guys as well, but I mean, obviously just Illinois legends, but really legends on a national level too. If you know guys from that era.
Right.
Okay, two last questions here, and this gets more to the theme of the podcast in the sense that anyone who's wrestled can agree that it changed their life. So I think the first question is, and this is from a quote that you gave back in the early 2000s when you were being inducted into one of the various Hall of Fames that you're remembered to, but you said, "I am who I am because of the sport of wrestling." Like, what did you mean by that? And maybe break that down to people who haven't wrestled and don't understand what you're talking about.
It's kind of like I talked about a little earlier in the podcast. The lessons, me as an assistant principal, me as a coach, me as an athletic director right now, I've used every single lesson that I've learned from wrestling, and I apply it to those positions. You have a tough day, at work, or a tough day at home. There's no tougher day than me getting beat by that Cuban, or me having to drop 20 pounds in 2 days. So I've had my back to the wall, many a times, and learned how to, to break through that and to deal with it and to deal with stressors in life. So, me as a professional now in education, it's because of wrestling.
Yeah. It transcends really all aspects of life, educators, business people, people in the movie business, obviously, as well. So
absolutely.
The stories of that are endless, and something we hope to spread with this the podcast we're running here. And last question for you, coaches. And you kind of just alluded to this, but I'd love to know, what was like the most vicious weight cut or most grueling weight cut that you can remember?
I was not paying attention to my weight. Well, it's two things actually. One, I went down to 125 for the U.S. Open. After my junior year in college, and I won the U.S. Open. So I thought that was my weight. Well, the year previous in college, I wrestled 34. So the next year I decided to go down to 26 and stay there all year, my senior year, which is probably one of the bigger mistakes I made, because every week was a battle with weight. And that was my goal, was to make weight, not to train. So probably one of my biggest disappointments. But Pan Am Games, I was 25 over with about 3 days left. That was a big drop.
Stop it. No way. 25?
Yeah, that was a big drop, especially out at Colorado
big...
Springs. Yeah, especially out of Colorado Springs with the altitude. It wasn't fun.
So what was it every week in college? Like, you'd come in Monday morning for practice. Were you like 10 over or more like 20 over?
15, 16, right around there.
That is a grind. And that's the one thing that people say, about wrestling, that it gets a bad rap because of that. So I'm curious to see what wrestling and what like UFC and some of those organizations do to curb weight cutting, because there's no question it's a total bummer. It just really dampens the love people have for the sport,
No, it does, absolutely. And like I said, that was my main competition, was the scale, and you're not going to be successful on an international or national level when that's the case. And they have gotten a lot better with it. I think the kids, it's more of a science now to them, the dieting and the nutrition. So I think they're doing a great job with it.
I hope to follow a little bit more closely. I'm getting back involved with coaching this year, so I'm curious to see what happens. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I can't tell you how many guys that I know who said, my goal is just to make weight. Like, forget about getting better, or like forget about like improving a technique. It was just about wearing as much sweats as possible, and it just makes it miserable,
Absolutely. Absolutely. But well worth it. Lessons learned.
Yeah, well worth it. And that's where you get that mental toughness too. So, well, Coach,
absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming on. I think just to close out here, I always ask people this. If some random person came up to you in the supermarket or wherever, and they say, "Hey, I'm thinking about letting my kid wrestle," why would you encourage me to let them wrestle? Like, what would you say? Maybe a sentence or two.
I'd say, the best decision you'll ever make. You have to learn how to take losses and win with dignity, and you have to. You're going to be only as good as you want to be. And it's up to you. No one's no one can hold you down. If you want to be good, you can be good. And I think that's something that kids will learn and take with them the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, thanks again for coming on, and we look forward to getting this out to the masses.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's the end of this episode, but definitely not the end of the show. For more episodes, please go to wrestlingchangemylife.org. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a star rating. Show the love, baby. Show the love. Thank you so much. We'll see you again soon. Peace.